All right, guys, welcome to our first special episode of the Dogs of War Gaming podcast. This is going to take place in between our normal releases, which are coming out bi-weekly right now.
This is episode 2.5.
Yeah, we'll call this episode 2.5. I'm Angelo.
I'm Tree.
And we have a special guest today. This is Craig. Say hi to everybody, Craig.
Hi, everybody.
So today we brought Craig in. We're going to do some talking about tournaments. This is going to be a generic episode where we're going to focus on tournament play, tournament preparation, how to handle, being at the tournament and things like that. And then we're going to specifically segue into some War Machine related tournament talk, and then finalizing up with some chatting about Crucible, which is our huge local tournament that we have here in Florida.
Which is always awesome and will be awesome this year.
Well, thanks.
So
I agree 100%.
Let's start with introducing Craig over here. So, Craig, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your gaming background, and what you kind of do around here, and
Sure.
what you play?
Well, I've been playing miniature games for, I guess, about 20 years, which seems like a long time, but it goes fast. I started out, I cut my teeth on 40K first, which is the way a lot of people do with miniatures. And then quickly moved into Warhammer Fantasy, and that became my favorite thing for many years. I played competitively, going to grand tournaments and all that sort of thing, back when there was a much bigger scene in the U.S. And then found out about this game, War Machine, and moved into that about, almost 3 years ago now. I want to say 2, but it always stretches out farther than I think. And that happened to coincide with the very first summer that my friend Chris Cuevas and I started thinking about, did we want to do a larger tournament and kind of host it here in Orlando. So, yeah, that's basically it.
So around that time, when you guys first decided that you were going to do this large-scale tournament, was that specifically geared towards War Machine, or was it going to be more towards the 40K fantasy stuff, and then because you started playing War Machine, it was added in? How did that kind of...
Well, it really came down to this. So let me give you a little bit of history. Do we want to get into the history of Crucible?
Sure. I mean, you're the organizer,
Craig,
so...
You are the history of Crucible.
Oh, that's true. My life is history. So it started out as... there was this doldrums for Warhammer Fantasy that happened when 8th edition came out. For a number of reasons, the scene kind of died around here. Nobody was playing it anymore. And Chris and I were sitting around. Chris and I have been friends for years and used to play competitively Warhammer together. And we'd always talked about this would be kind of fun to do. Well, there was a large tournament that was in Orlando called Necro, or the Necronomicon, but it was always shortened to the Necro. And the Necro went belly up in this winter of 2011. The organizer, I think, just got tired, and just it kind of petered out, which happens with large events, right? So Chris and I were saying it's really a shame that we'd gone a year without a large event, and we kind of felt like the scene was drying up because of it, at least for competitive miniature gaming. We thought we ought to do something about it. And he was a press ganger for Privateer Press at the time, which is the volunteer organizing people for War Machine and Hordes. And I said, can you teach me War Machine, and maybe we can do an event around that. So yeah, it was originally designed as this is going to be a War Machine Hordes event only. And that first year we had 32 players from around Florida in a small room in a basically a wedding ballroom at a Days Inn. And there's a lot of stories that go along with that too that are some good and some not so good. But the great thing about starting your own event is that those early years become legendary stories later on.
Definitely.
Everybody cries about them, but everybody has a great time retelling the stories. So
immediately coming to my mind is Crucible 2's infamous Qualifier 1 that ended at 2 in the morning and was followed by the change of daylight savings time to shorten down the sleep time even more.
Yes.
That's great.
People ended up playing, if they played them both qualifiers that day, they ended up playing probably about 18 hours straight, and then maybe had 2 hours of sleep to start Masters the next day.
Yep.
So that was you.
That was fun. I was not in the Masters that year, but... No, but people seem to be having a great time anyway.
Yeah.
So you're a press ganger. You're actually the press ganger for Dogs of War Gaming here.
Right.
What got you into becoming a press ganger? And tell the people kind of what a press ganger does for people who maybe aren't familiar with that kind of concept.
Sure. Well, so let me just say, I fought becoming a press ganger for a couple of years. I have a problem with authority. I don't know what it is. Unless I'm in charge, then I have absolutely no problem with authority. So I didn't want to be the organizer guy. I felt like I already had enough on my plate with Crucible, which really only happens once a year, but it works all around the year. to do it. But I love the game a lot, and I've found in my time in gaming is if there's not kind of a driving force, a personality, or at least a group of people who is really dedicated and wants to dedicate their time to it, communities don't really grow. And you could say the same thing about Crucible, but becoming a press ganger here, I felt like was really probably the step that needed to be done. So we had kind of an anchor in the store that was always pushing the game forward. What press gangers do, they're a completely voluntary group. And I never know if I should be looking at you guys or
No, you're fine,
All right.
Look at the camera, look at us, look at wherever you want. Look at Jesus over there eating his donuts,
They don't actually even support stores, although I really only support Dogs of War here, which is a great store, by the way. I love this store.
And says thumbs up.
They're only responsible to the players, which is kind of unique. And I think, well, maybe it's not, but as far as I'm concerned, it's unique. Privateer Press actually has a system where they give points and they reimburse the press gangers for their time. So it's never you never really kind of feel like you're just bashing your head against the wall trying to grow things. You're actually getting compensated for it too, and you're involved in the game all the time. You'll find over time, being an organizer of any kind, that your morale tends to flag after a while. Your energy drops. Having somebody else there to say, yeah, but here's a reason to keep going, is always good. Unless you're a good self-motivator, too.
So, for those who don't know, kind of what's the brief overview of how do you become a press ganger? Like, what are the requirements? What does Privateer expect to kind of become one?
There aren't a lot of requirements. What you have to do is be sponsored by a store, and you have to get a good recommendation. There's a form that you fill out. You take a picture of yourself. I'm not sure what that's about. I can make my assumptions.
I want to make sure you're a real person.
Yep. Yes, that's probably true too. No bots, that's PGs. And then when you fill out the form, the questions are something like, how long have you been doing this? What do you play? And then you have to have 2 painted battle boxes from the same system. For those of you who don't play War Machine or Hordes, it's actually 2 different gaming systems and they work together. They can be played together, they can be played separately, but they're considered separate gaming systems. So in order to be a press ganger, you have to have 2 factions in War Machine or 2 factions in Hordes for the battle boxes, and they have to be painted.
That's great.
And you have to take pictures to prove it.
Cool.
And that's really all there is to it. Then beyond that, you have to run events. And if you don't run an event for a year, you become inactive. So they keep a fairly good hand on it,
Hey, you got Crucible every year.
Yes, I've always got that
one event. You've got Crucible.
Yeah, and I get like 6
in your
events there. Yeah, they do reimburse you for time spent supporting cons too, which is great. So there's almost always a supply of press gangers willing to help out with
that's great
larger events.
All right, so that's kind of Craig and why he's kind of here on the show today. He'll probably become a more frequent guest host as we do War Machine related topics on the podcast and stuff like that.
Sure.
So let's kind of move into general tournament stuff, right? So we're going to kind of keep this broad in the sense of we want to touch a lot of different game systems. We don't want to necessarily focus on any one given one right now per se. So from y'all's point of view, why should people play in tournaments? Like, what's the motivating factor to go, I'm going to go spend some money to actually play this game that I'm already playing for free with my buddies at home or whatever the case may be? So where do you feel like you get that motivation to go at that competitive level?
The biggest thing I've always said, and Jesus will agree with me on this, he's nodding over there, whether he knows it or not. For people who are getting into a game or are trying to step up their game, going to tournaments gets you guaranteed number of games with people you don't usually play, or at least presumably if you're traveling elsewhere. These are games that will be played more competitively than you'll be playing on your home kitchen table or in your local leagues or whatever. And you get a chance to see how other people play the game, and how people who are who are trying to win more than anything else are playing the game.
Yeah, agreed. You will 100% become a better player faster, right? You can probably get to that level of play that you want to get to playing in your basement or whatever, or at your coffee table. But you absolutely will improve faster. The variety of opponents that you get to see and the different strategies is invaluable. I'm continually blown away by the things that people come up with that I had never even considered. You also get to connect with the broader meta, and all of the competitive games we play are social at their heart,
very much
right?
so.
So getting out and getting to meet other people who play the game, getting to nerd out for an afternoon and just talk about the hobby that you love, there's value in that. And that's one of the things I always push to people when they talk about, do I want to go to larger events like the one I run? But, I mean, really any large con or anything like that, what's the reason to go? You get to get together with a bunch of people who love the same things you love.
Exactly.
And there's no real other way to get that.
Yeah.
You can get it online to some extent, but you never meet those people. And
guaranteed number of games. If you're going to a 16-man tournament, you're going to be playing 4 rounds. You're going to get 4 games. There are most days you can go down to your local gaming store or whatever, and you go in and maybe there are opponents there, maybe there aren't. If there are, you're probably not going to be able to get 4 games in a day that way, just because you're going to.
You have real life. You have timing,
slack between games. There's not going to be 16 different people there all trying to play 4 games at a time. So the guaranteed games, I think, is another great thing about going to tournaments
and being forced to play other people too.
Yes, that is always a great reason to go.
You know, local store metas and dogs is no different. People tend to eventually start kind of playing the same people that they know. They're friends. You know, I mean, and you also might find that. Maybe better players end up playing better players a lot of times, and other people maybe at a lower skill level might play other people that they feel comfortable playing. But you're forced to kind of get outside of your comfort zone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean that's perfect because when I first started playing here at Dogs, Tree and I played a lot of games, no matter what the game was, back and forth for a very long period of time when I was learning or trying to get better really quickly. And so lately it seems like the only time we ever get paired up to play anymore is when we're in tournaments, because I think we kind of got burned out playing each other all the time. And it's cool because it does give you a wider variety of people to play against. I went out to Tampa a couple of weeks ago for the first Carnage qualifier, and I've played against everybody here. I've played against the guys in Orlando. I've played against the guys in Miami. I've never played against any of those Tampa guys.
Yeah.
And getting a chance to go out there and play with those guys and see how they play the game, what their person. I love that interaction aspect of that.
And you get to see where your meta stands.
Yeah, definitely.
Other local metas. And there's nothing better than walking in and stomping another meta, and you're like, oh, that's right. I guess the guys I play with on.
Or thinking that, hey, you're the hot shot from your meta, and you walk in.
Are you just the big fish in the really small pond?
Yeah, that's another kind of revelation that comes through. Absolutely.
It can be a wake-up call to some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, a lot of the reasons I went to tournaments when I first started getting into these games was simply to get better very quickly. I felt like, I could sit there and I could play a couple of games a week on the table here in the shop, and I'll learn the game and I'll get the mechanics down. But without that competitive edge, which is, hey, there's a prize up for grabs no matter what it is, a playmat, models, gift card, whatever, just the prestige of winning, a coin. Yeah. People tend to bring, lack of a better word, their A game to those kinds of situations.
Absolutely.
And when you have to play against players that have that drive to be, I'm going to stomp you into the ground as hard as possible because this isn't a fun game, this is not a casual game right now, this is a competitive game, you learn very quickly how to get better at the game and counter those strategies, or you learn something new that maybe you just didn't realize. And so when I dive in head first, I'm like, I'm not going to spend all this money on this game to play at the mediocre level. I want to get good so I can that's my enjoyment out of the game is going into a matchup and at least knowing I have a 50-50 chance of winning, which is I think anybody can ever ask for. You never want to be the underdog in the match. No. Although if you do win, then it's cool because, hey, you beat that guy you shouldn't have. But you go in and maybe you're a little bit more stressed because of that. So to get to that competitive level state, I feel like going to those tournaments is what gets you there faster,
I'm going to pay you a compliment. Angelo plays a lot of different games. Actually, Tree plays more games than I think anybody does.
Too many.
But Angelo will step into just about any game and has no ego about losing will take his lumps and in just about any game with the object of being, I want to play the best player so I get better, and that's a really healthy attitude.
Absolutely.
But which leads into the next thing. So how do you mentally prepare for going to these tournaments, right? So you're going to be playing these really good players, or you may be playing some newer players. Like, how do you get yourself, what do you expect when you go to this tournament, and how do you get yourself kind of mentally prepared for that kind of play style?
There are a few different things there. One for me, I never go in saying I'm going to win first place. I think it's a bad attitude going in. And don't get me wrong, it's a good goal to have, but I usually tend to go in more realistic of, I'm trying more or less shoot for 50-50. If I end above that, absolutely, it's fantastic. If I'm below that, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas if you go in with the idea that mentally I'm going to go win this thing, I'm going to go crush everyone, destroy lamentation of the women and all that, and you lose.
Not so much with lamentation.
Not so much.
It is a game story. No, I'm just kidding.
Come on, we gotta go. Conan. You gotta go Conan every once in a while, but you never go full Conan.
Never go full
Because no one wants to see any of us with no shirts on.
Yeah, true.
But I find that if you go in thinking, I'm gonna crush this, I'm gonna win this, is gonna be an easy day, I'm gonna rule the world, you get put on tilt very easily all throughout the day.
Definitely.
And I think it's much better if you go in with let it roll off your back and. Not so much of a must win or die attitude.
Agreed. I always tell, especially newer players, this is very hard. By the way, I'm in my 40s, so my testosterone is plateaued off. I'm not so focused on I have to win. I love to win. But I try not to have any ego about it, and that's what I try and tell newer players getting into it too. You're going to lose, and there are people out there who are better than you, and there are people who are going to dice you off the table. And you're going to find bad matchups, and a lot of that stuff you can't control. So try and forget that it actually is hurting you. It's not hurting you at all. It only hurts you if you don't walk away from it with a learning. Something you can take away and say, was there something I did wrong there, or could have done better, or could I have anticipated that he was going to do that, and that sort of thing?
It's interesting you talk about that. I'm going to throw some props out real quick to the Chain Attack guys. I was listening to one of their podcasts the other day, and they had an episode they released from their private paid-for subscription service that they released to the public that was about how to lose games and be good about it and what to take away. And one of the things they specifically touched on was you gain more from losing games than you ever will by winning games, generally.
Absolutely.
If you can approach a game that you've lost and understand why it is you lost, and you don't blame the dice, you don't blame the random draw of your cards, you don't blame whatever the random mechanic that exists in every game, because they all have them then you will become a better player faster if you can analyze why did I lose and what could I have done differently. Where was that tipping point in that game that's where I made the crucial mistake or series of mistakes that cost me that match. And
you tend not to think about the ones you won.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
Okay, that's done, and we're moving on to the next round. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Because the ego also says, oh, no, I won that game. That's how every game is supposed to go.
And then you go into the next game thinking, all right, well, I steamrolled that guy, and now I'm gonna steamroll this guy, and you can get tilt. So let's talk about tilt real quick, because that kind of goes into the mental stuff. Yeah. So tilting, for those of you who maybe haven't listened to one of our earlier episodes where we kind of talked about it a little bit, or are just unfamiliar with the term, is when something happens in a game match, or even before a game even starts, that gets you kind of psyched out and starts making you make bad decisions on the game state, whether it's the board, the cards, the dice, whatever the case may be. And it's very hard for some people to figure out that A, they are on tilt, and B, how to get out of it and get back into a level state of mind to play the game. So how do you think players can approach that kind of mindset? How do you recognize you're in it, and then how do you get yourself out of the hole?
Wow, that is absolutely a tough one.
I was thinking to myself, how am I going to answer this? I hope Tree answers first.
All right, so I had one game in particular I was playing. This is just a friendly game with Angelo, not this one, a different Angelo. He's a very good War Machine player. And we're playing, and I had actually just pulled out, it was one of the 2 games I played in Mark II with Circle. And he put, I got so on tilt because I was missing dice rolls, he was hitting dice rolls, and it seemed like nothing was going my way. And I'm getting frustrated and stuff, and he looks at me and he says, bro, calm down. It's just a game. We're having fun. If it's not fun, we can stop. And it was one of those things, it kind of clicked with me. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this for fun. Why am I getting upset? It's a game. This is not end of the world stuff. And I think from there, that's kind of the attitude I've tried to take into tournaments and other, even just league games, is not the end of the world. My house doesn't burn down if I lose this game.
Yeah.
And nothing bad comes of losing this game.
It's not like you're playing Magic where there's $80,000 on the line or something like that, which, it's not like there's that pressure that, if I lose this game, how am I going to pay my bills for the next 6 months, For
those of you Pro Tour players play for $80,000, you should absolutely be on tilt.
Yeah.
I think that's what Angela's saying.
If nothing else, you should be looking at your opponent. You should be trying to put your opponent on tilt, throw cards at them and stuff when the judge isn't looking.
Yeah.
Well, that is the flip side of this argument too. Like, there's always the potential. How do you put your opponent on tilt? And while in a friendly match, you probably don't want to do that. It gets a viable strategy in tournament play. Though.
So Mike Tyson very famously said, roughly, no, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yep. No plan survives a punch in the face.
I firmly believe that that's true. I do it to players all the time if I know they've got a new piece. Or it could be a new card.
Such a jerk move.
And then you go and deliberately try and take that out as early as possible so that they don't have it and their plan disintegrates. They may still have options, but now their morale is down.
Yeah. And it's not even just a new model. It could be a favorite model or a, like...
Yes.
I've seen it in miniatures games. I've seen it with something that is newly painted. I don't know why, but there's something about, I finished this model, I want to put it on the table painted, and boom, you just two-shot it off the board, and they're like... But
well, I think in any game, if you can identify those linchpins in your opponent's gameplay strategy, whether it's certain cards they're putting on the board, certain models, whatever maybe their tactics are going to be, if you can identify those and you can just invalidate that completely, a lot of players don't know how to come back from that. Like, you build your deck or you build your list, and you're building it around wanting to do this very specific thing, and I need these 3 or 2 pieces, whatever the case may be, to accomplish these things. So as a player, I've got to convince my opponent that those pieces maybe aren't as important as they are, because I don't want him knowing that. But then on the other side, you need to identify what those pieces are, and if you can take them out early enough or invalidate them, your opponent goes on the back foot because he's like, well, there goes my entire game strategy. It happened to me out in Tampa. I was playing against Adam Stewart in the final match of the Carnage, and arguably, I mean, it was the end of the day. I was tired. We've been up all day, and he ran up his Blood Witches. He popped Incorporeal on them. I'm like, great, I have an answer on my list for this. I specifically brought this list for that answer. And forgetting, because I'd never played against him before, what Ornn Midwinter, for example, actually did. And that one specific interaction threw me off for the rest of the game. And I found myself on the back foot, and I couldn't figure out how to dig myself out. And I identified that easily enough because I realized that I was starting to be careless when I was making activations with my models. Like, these are situations I've played in before that I know the outs out of. The list is designed to get out of them, but because I was so frustrated that something went wrong in the game, I kept finding myself further and further on the back foot because I couldn't come back from that. Because I was in that weird mental state where it's like, man, I've already lost the game. There's absolutely no way I'm digging myself out of that. And for myself specifically, that's how I can generally start to identify when I'm on the back foot, is when I get that mentality that there's no way I'm coming back from this. I'm going to lose this game. And I can identify that in other players too, because I see other people do it on the other side of the board for me too, where you can be on turn 2 and they're like, wow, I can't believe what just happened. There's no way I'm going to win this game now. It's like, you can't say that. Like, it's turn 2 of the game. We're 20 minutes in. You can always come back. Every game has an answer generally to how you come back. It might be a long shot, but it's there. And if you can identify that, that's what you have to do, and you need to be able to find those situations, I think.
Yeah, scrambling is not always easy to do, especially when you're fatigued. And that's, I think, when it comes to tournaments, one way to avoid the fatigue is definitely got to keep on drinking water. I mean, that's like... that's like basic chemistry, body chemistry or whatever, but you definitely have to keep on drinking. I find that making sure you stay with some kind of caffeine load is good too. Not overload, obviously, because you don't want your hands shaking.
Actually, for tournaments, I completely skip the caffeine, go straight to water. Card tournaments, miniatures tournaments, whatever it is, a bottle, like a full-on one of these, what was it, 13-ounce... pint of water either every hour or every round of the tournament as best you can.
Yep. I don't want to overstate this, but the brain consumes a lot of calories. Believe it or not. I mean, you're not going to get buff off of it, but it will consume a lot of calories, and you have to feed it. You do. You absolutely have to feed it. That's how fatigue sets in. So.
Well, and there's an interesting aspect too. So if you go to like longer day tournaments, like cons and stuff like that, you also run into the social side of the game too. And when I say the social side, it's after the game's done, you're done, you go out to get dinner, and then invariably it ends up, well, let's get drinks. But you have to
after the tournament,
or even during. To be fair, but
we were talking about cons.
But again, though, in the morning last Crucible.
If you were there. If you are there though with the intention to win or bring your A game, you have to take everything in consideration when you're playing, right? Like, for me personally, I don't doubt anybody for doing this. You can do whatever you want, whatever works for you. But I try to stay away from getting highly intoxicated when I'm at multi-day events, because if I have to go to bed at 2 in the morning and be up at 7 to be in the next tournament round, I'm getting 5 hours of sleep and I'm probably still hungover. Am I really going to bring my best game to the table the next day to be able to play?
Oh yeah.
Yep,
that's definitely a factor.
Oh, it's definitely a factor. However, I will counter with the fact that, and not to encourage alcohol drinking or anything like that, but both myself and several of the others, Ed in particular, who was the one that brought the cooler to Crucible last year, a beer between games was kind of keeping totally keeping the edge off.
Oh,
and
yeah,
it was
perfect.
It was probably the best way I've ever fought the tilt. It was just
Well, there you
like,
go.
yeah, all right, cool, let's do this.
Yeah. So getting back to fighting the tilt.
Yeah.
Having a good poker face, I think, for one thing, because by the way, it still hurts me when I lose my key pieces too.
Yeah.
But having a good poker face and not showing it is, I think, one of the steps you can take, because if your opponent senses that he suddenly hurt you, I've
They
been
get
playing
more aggressive, and they will
Yes.
try to push you, because going on tilt kind of usually puts you on the in a defensive mode, and if they can be more aggressive and force you to continue to be defensive, they're making the moves they want to make, and you are only reacting to them usually.
Yes.
Sorry to
Yep.
cut you off.
No, absolutely. That's right. So you got to think of a new plan, and even if it's just a fake,
Yep. Yeah.
where you're okay. Well, now at least I'm going to start attacking here and see if he figures out what I'm doing to give me some time to
recover.
To recover, right?
And you're great at that, by the way. I mean, right before I went to the night before I went to Carnage, we played that game, and I brought this weird matchup list that I was testing to maybe play against Cricks with. So I had Craig bring his Cricks, and I mulched probably 40 points of your army off the board in one activation.
Yes.
And Craig's face had the most horrified look. So he lost the poker face, but he recovered really well. He looked at the board state and he goes, "I know I can still win this. I know how to do it."
I remember that game.
Now, to be fair, we after the fact, he looked back and he said the activation order he used it was actually incorrect and he couldn't be able to pull it off. But at the time, when we did it though, he was looking at the board and he goes, "Okay, I should lose this game." And he found an answer to win. And that's what you have to do, you know? You have to find those answers. The game is not over until whatever the objective is to win the game has been achieved, right?
I would say, especially with War Machine, and I can't say for all card games because I don't play all of them, but with War Machine, there's almost always an option because it's like chess, and that if you kill the leader, you win.
Yeah.
So you've always got options. Play until the very last die roll. I've seen people concede in tournaments. That's the worst thing you can do. I mean, not taking away anything from somebody who's like, you know what, I'm done. I'm leaving for the day. It's yours. I'm out.
I've been there.
Right. I think we probably all have had that kind of feeling. But play until the end. There's always options, and you're kind of doing everybody else in the tournament a disservice if you do just surrender. The strength of schedule gets all screwed up and all that sort of thing. Points are scored that shouldn't be scored. So duke it out. And besides, you learn some things in those kind of last desperate moments too.
You do.
If you are able to keep an open mind enough to go, I think I still had something there. I didn't realize it.
I've won a few of those games where it looks like everything is lost.
And especially in dice games.
Oh yeah, especially if you can just roll trip sixes.
Yep.
You know, and
Trip 6 beat strategy every time.
And,
Adam Stewart, if you're watching, I'm sorry.
But it's a great point. You know, I normally don't make it a habit of dropping from tournaments until you're at the point where it's like we're cutting to the top two, and at that point it's like you can play another game if you want, but really once you're at the top two cut, if you drop at that point, the strength of schedule adjustment really isn't going to matter to most games at that point. And almost every game that we play, at least in this shop, has some weird strength of schedule component that's built into it for a tiebreaker. And a good example of that was when I went to Crucible this past year. I literally played every tournament you guys hosted there except for Masters because I didn't qualify. And that wasn't because I was trying to win them. It's because, again, I got more out of playing games against highly competitive players and losing or winning, either way, than I would have gotten if I had just dropped and watched games, right? And there's something wrong with that. Like, you know, Mike and Ed decided not to play for the next day, and that's cool. They enjoyed the rest of the con by walking around.
Great time hanging out on
Yeah,
Sunday.
exactly.
I got to watch a bunch of great games, which is also another great thing about going to tournaments.
Yeah.
If you happen to be the poor guy who's got the buy around at any point, or just if you end up not playing in every event that's run at a convention, watch games. Try really hard not to interact with games as they're being played, but definitely watch them. Because you'll see things, and like with that, basically you've got that like 20,000 foot view where you're not in control of any pieces, so you're just watching stuff unfold, and you'll see moves be like, oh, he totally could have played this card to do this turn, and but he doesn't know his opponent's got other stuff in his hand. With War Machine, you'll see angle like standing at the side of the table versus on one of the deployment zones is totally different.
That's the best way to play.
Oh, you see so much stuff they miss. It's
But you know, the interesting thing about that is, and especially in like a tabletop miniatures game, is there's no rule that I'm aware of that says you have to stand on your side of the table.
Oh, no.
So if you play games and you notice these things, where like can't tell you how many games I sit here and watch at the store, and I realize, like Mike's saying, if I'm on the left side of the board or the right side of the board, not the other deployment zones, I see interactions that you just don't see from that view. And there's something to be said about possibly getting up in the middle of your game and walking over and looking at the board from a different angle and saying,
wow,
what can I get out of this? And hey, maybe we just found the new meta in War Machine and Hordes is, use a different angle to look at the board. But
I honestly had never thought about that.
You see it all the time. You step away. And
there's been one situation you can actually, like, where I've ended up playing on my opponent's side of the board. Bog Trogs for War Machine or for Hordes let you come in from the sides of the board rather than from your deployment zone on a later turn. So usually when you do that, you end up on your somewhere near your opponent's side of the board. And I've had games where I end up doing a third of my turn as the Bog Trogs, and I'm standing right next to my opponent moving stuff, and it's a very strange experience, looking across at your own army, and then you're still doing stuff near theirs, but
maybe you see something you're missing. Maybe there's something there. Walk to your opponent's side of the board when your turn starts and go, what does the angles look like from this direction instead? And maybe you see something you missed. So we'll kind of segue into the next part now, I guess, which is I want to talk about win conditions, knowing what the win conditions are in the game and how to identify when you're at that point where you possibly have them. And then I think time management's the other big thing, right? Because every game we play has a time component built into it, whether it's a card game, a miniature game. There's always some type of timer that says, here's how long you have to play the game. And then how do you manage that time inside that space too? And I think that goes hand in hand with the win condition, because if you go to time, you generally don't normally win a lot of times because the tiebreakers are usually for modified wins in that type of case because you didn't actually win the game. But how do you start identifying when you can maybe hit that win condition, and you're having to do that within a fixed amount of time in any game state?
All right, I'm actually going to steal this back to our previous preparation thing, kind of as a dual subject. One of the most important things I find for preparation is showing up to a tournament with a list Not so much it may not be the very best list, but if you know this list or this deck in and out, backwards and forwards, and could play it in your sleep, you will do so much better than playing whatever the best happens to be. And I think that's going to play into here, because on time management, if I'm playing, when you play a brand new list the first time, you're going to miss a lot of things. You might not know all of the interactions. You certainly don't know have all of your stats memorized and stuff like that. A list you've been playing in and out, week in and week out, and this is something I don't usually do, by the way. At least not for War Machine. I do it for card games, but not so much for...
but I don't practice.
Yeah.
No, and I suffer for that. And I usually, actually, more often than not, I end up, when push comes to shove and a tournament actually comes around, I fall back to lists that I haven't played for months, but that I played extensively previously. And I know them well enough, and usually they have one or two new moving pieces in them that I inevitably screw up or forget. So that's, I think that's important for your for time and for win condition, is knowing your list, knowing how it wins, knowing when you can kind of make a push on a certain objective or things like that, or when you don't have, knowing you don't have the strength to take it yet, and waiting for your opponent maybe to move forward and try to take them at an inopportune moment. So that's my initial thought there.
Yeah, even in card games. I know recently you played in a Game of Thrones tournament where I think you won 2 different games because your opponent failed to count the amount of power that was going to put you at the win condition.
They weren't paying attention to how many points you need to win.
And you have to be aware of these things, whether it's a tabletop game where there's objectives on the board, or you're trying to assassinate your opponent's general or their warcaster, depending on what you're playing, or a card game that very specifically has, destroy X amount of objectives and you win, or score X number of points and you win, and that type of stuff. You need to be able to identify the board state at any given time and go, what is the current win condition on the board, if there is one, and then how do I get there?
That's a chess thing right there. Chess is always... I'm not a professional chess player by any stretch of the imagination. Let me just say that.
We know what the pieces do.
Yeah, I'm going to bumble this. But it's always about making the strongest move, right? So, being able to identify the strongest move and go with that is pretty important.
And there's also in identifying how to win, identify how you win. It's also important how to identify you don't lose.
Yeah.
I saw a game that Craig played recently against one of our local Legion players. It was a War Machine game where Craig was holding his zone. And in War Machine, you score points for holding zones or objective points, and you score them at the end of your turn and your opponent's turn. And Craig was in the zone and had started scoring points. His opponent needed to put something into the zone to prevent Craig from scoring on his turn, on the opponent's turn to win. And refused to, because he was basically whatever was going in there was going to get munched by Craig's werewolf guys.
Yeah, right.
and he didn't do it. And Craig, you even told Shrek, you're like, if you don't move a guy in here, you lose on my turn. And your opponent still didn't do it. It was one of those, you look at him like, okay, well.
That might have been a punch in the face moment there.
Yeah.
It might, well, yeah, well, that's, and that's one of those, that exactly is the hard thing. Is like, by the way, do something now or you lose. That is definitely punching your opponent in the face.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I have absolutely lost the same way in real tournaments, right? That was just a friendly game. John Carter is a local Crix player over in Orlando. Excellent player. And the last tournament I played him in, I saw on my turn, I was like, okay, he's really hurt me this turn. I've got to assassinate this turn. I think I have everything I need to do it. I'm going to make the move. First 2 rolls failed. And I was like, and then I suddenly had that moment like, dang it, it's not working. And I'm scrambling, trying to do it, scrambling, trying to do it. Didn't move into the zone. And John literally at the beginning of the next turn says, oh, Craig, why didn't you move into the zone? I said, oh, I didn't, did I? He's like, no.
Because then they don't have to do anything at all. Like usually that turns into you end your turn, they give you a funny look, and they say, I end my turn and score 2 more points and win.
Yeah.
And you just go like, you're at the table, you look at it, you go, what am I doing?
So well.
But yeah, and so while the win condition is important, also playing to the clock is too, right? So a good example, going back to what Mike touched on, was the whole know what you're playing with, right? So we had our very first Warhammer Conquest LCG tournament yesterday, and out of everybody in the shop that was here, with the exception of maybe the Orlando guys, because I don't know how often they've played, I've probably been in here the most playing games simply because of the time I had available to do it.
I played twice.
Yeah, and I'd also been dabbling online and stuff like that. So with what I was doing yesterday, I constantly found myself waiting on my opponent to make decisions. Like my turns were very, very quick because I knew what I was executing, right? I knew what the win condition was on the board. I knew what I had to do to get there, so I executed my plan and I went. Whereas a lot of times I was waiting on my opponent and they were taking a very long time, and I think that's because the game's new. People haven't spent a lot of time with their decks, which is completely acceptable, right?
Yep.
But you move on to a game like, say like War Machine, where you're required to bring at minimum 2 different armies to the table to play with, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I generally bring an army that I know inside and out. That I know if I'm playing on a tight clock or I'm playing against an opponent that's going to be dragging the clock, if I play this list, I know I'm always going to be fine. And then maybe my other list I know 60, 70% of, because maybe I've tweaked a few things here and there and I wanted to try something else that I thought was going to match the meta or whatever. But you have to be aware of that. And I think having a good internal clock works there too, right? So an example of War Machine as an example, if you're playing on 10-minute turns and you have a total round length, so the entire length of the round we're playing in for everybody is, let's say, an hour and 20 minutes, you should be able to mathematically count how many times the clock needs to go back and forth on 10-minute turns to figure out how long you've been playing the game, and then start to realize that round timers are coming up, and you need to identify how you can win in the event that you have to go to a tiebreaker instead to win that match.
It's not even that hard.
It's not,
right?
But a lot of people get surprised, know? A lot of people will be in the middle and they'll be like, dice down, and you're like, what? How'd that happen? It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but you're given a clock. You're very specifically given a clock that if you can do basic math, you should be able to track those round lengths. And card games are kind of the same way. We have a clock in the shop. If he says start time, you have a clock on your phone. You're not allowed to run your own timer, but if you can look at a clock and tell time, you can figure out how close you are to, you're going to go to that modified win, you're going to go to that modified loss and stuff like that. So I think being cognizant of gameplay time is very important.
Actually, and that varies from system to system. I know there are several systems where it doesn't say you can't take notes or you can't run your own clock. No. So I don't know. Does War Machine say anything about keeping your own time?
No, there's no specific thing there. But what they do with War Machine is the round lengths are random.
That's true.
So there's always a plus or minus of 6 minutes in a typical 50-point tournament. So
give
that's
yourself a buffer though.
So basically, if you could set yourself a clock like on your
54 minutes
on your phone of the minimum round time, so that you at least have an idea. Okay, now we're coming into we have up to 12 minutes left. I should be, if I haven't won the game yet, I should certainly be looking at hedging my bets towards winning the game.
Yeah, and those are really. I don't even know if they're high-level play kind of things, but they're definitely little kind of tips that you can pull off. Maybe everybody's head is not in that kind of mindset or even wants to be, but those are absolutely little tricks.
Yeah. But you can win on time in a game like a system like...
Absolutely.
Yeah, War Machine is a very specific game that's designed, especially if you're playing on like Death Clock, for example, which we won't get into the debate about Death Clock and time turns, but Death Clock has a win condition built in, which is if you can clock your opponent out, it's a valid win condition. People build lists to specifically clock their opponents. And whether that's good for the game or bad for the game is debatable, right? But if you're playing in a format that has that variable in there,
take advantage of it.
Yeah, take advantage of it. I mean, it's a win state.
I'll say this as a tournament preparation thing as well. If you find out in a as you're preparing or just playing your casual games, you realize, hey, my deck takes about 80 minutes to win this game, and the round time is 60 minutes.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. Same thing with War Machine. If you need 15 minutes to run your turn more than once a game at 50 points, then you're not going to make time. And
yeah, which really gets down, I think, to the crux of it. I know from War Machine, if you're playing in any kind of tournament thing that's timed, play with a timer in your casual games.
Absolutely.
It seems like a no-brainer, right? But so many people don't because they just want to, I just want to go to the store. But it doesn't take any effort to set up a timer and go.
And the best thing I've seen people do, one of our local players, Donald, did this for a couple of games, and he just set the timer, because I was playing on the timer with him, and I was stopping my turn at the timer. I said, dude, I'm just going to stop my turn at the timer just because I'm trying to get the practice in if I need to, kind of shore up my game a bit. And I said, you feel free to play with the timer too. Don't feel obligated at all to stop your turn at the 10 minutes. And he didn't. And he saw, so the first real turn of the game, besides, turn 1, you're just running out. But turn 2, he went to about 13 minutes. And when it ticked, he's like, oh, okay. And he started the timer again to see how much longer he needed. And over the span of 3 or 4 turns, his turns came in quite a bit. And it forced him to be a bit more focused. And I saw him do it a couple of games.
I think it makes you a sharper player too.
Oh, it does. Well, it also. I personally tend to play games very quickly. I make my move especially card games. It's just a skill. I guess you see the right move or the what you think is the best move there and just go for it. I don't tend to analyze too much. I don't get stuck. I try not to get stuck in the analysis paralysis of anything where you're like, oh, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. And I think it forces you more into an instinct mode more than anything else. And I think that the time clock definitely does that for you as well. In on a time turns level, you're like, okay, this may not be the best move possible, but it's the move that took me 30 seconds to do, and it did something productive.
Yeah, and you start to get used to prioritizing what needs to happen.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's something I always teach to newer players as they're starting to get it, and they're starting to figure out, I don't know how I get through this. Well, first of all, do the stuff that needs to happen, and you can think about the other stuff as you're doing it.
Yep.
So get it down. Now, you don't want to screw up order of activation or anything like that wants to happen, but yeah. If you're really indecisive and you're like, I just don't know, well, okay, I got to get these done.
Yeah.
Do it.
And I've seen that happen in tournaments before. We're on a 10-minute turn for War Machine. You have an opponent who will sit there for 4.5 minutes and not move anything, just trying to analyze, and you spent half your turn doing nothing.
Yep.
Yeah,
and that's rough.
The other thing is you have to also understand in any game that maybe not all of your pieces actually need to do something that
absolutely.
turn. So if you have pieces that are going to do a lot of work, or you have cards that are going to be very important to play or whatever, get those done first and invest the majority of your time into those, because those are the ones that are going to pay the most value. And then if you maybe don't activate this guy over here, you don't get that one card in play. If it didn't matter, if it wasn't going to affect the game state for that turn or even potentially the next turn, just let it go. Don't waste the time losing the valuable stuff so you can activate the chud over here who's going to walk up and do nothing.
To throw it back to, don't go on tilt if you don't get everything done this turn. If you forget something, if it didn't lose you the game, you're still in it.
Yeah.
I forgot to move this guy, or I forgot to play this card as a response to a thing. Move on. It's not worth thinking about. Remember it later, after the game. Remember and think, shoot, had I made that move on turn 2, I would have won. I would not have lost on turn 8.
Well, and camping is not necessarily a bad thing. If all else fails, again, putting it in War Machine standards, if all else fails, if your caster camps all of their focus and is protected that round, you're
probably not going to die.
You're probably not going to lose the game on that.
Yeah.
So it's not so horrible, but yeah.
So in card games, the same thing would be, don't be afraid to not attack for a turn. Yeah, I mean, sit back and defend.
Yep.
And sometimes the best offense is a good defense.
Yep. Let them waste themselves swinging at you.
Yeah.
All right. So you bought your plane ticket. You got your hotel room. You're registered at the con. You're ready to go. You get your list.
I forgot my miniatures.
You show up. You sit down. You start playing. You lose your game. What do you do?
I try to keep a healthy attitude going into the losers bracket. I read a very interesting article. I believe it was 3 Dice Overload posted it. If not, I apologize. I read a lot of random websites. It's a great job. And basically, this one player kind of he realized it's an observational piece that he said that as you look at a tournament, as you go up the table numbers, you see happier people, and as you go down the table numbers, you see people unhappy, getting less and less happy, down to the point where he said by the end of the day, this is a War Machine tournament example, but by the end of the day, he himself was on one of the bottom tables, and he and his opponent didn't even shake hands, like, at all. Like, at all. It was kind of like, yeah, go here, yeah, do this. And he said it was an interesting phenomenon that, you know, it makes sense. The people who are winning are having a better time than the people who are losing, but we're all still here playing a game.
Yeah.
Like, this is supposed to be something we do for fun. If you're not having fun, there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, agreed. Especially if you're at a con.
And it is frustrating to lose, but I think that's kind of like that's like tilt for the day almost. When you go on a losing streak and you kind of like, as it gets worse and worse, you get into a worse and worse mood, you play worse, and just in general, like, it kind of like you kind of flush yourself down the toilet.
Yeah,
I almost like losing sometimes, only from the standpoint of it releases a lot of that pressure that you feel like you have to win, right?
Yeah.
Like the moment I lose in a tournament, and a lot of these tournaments, if you've lost, well, not all of them, it depends on what the cut is and stuff like that, but
if there's no cut,
if you've lost a game, you're done. You're not coming in first or second.
Any Swiss pairing.
Yeah, you're done for the day. If there's a cut, it's a different story. But the moment you've lost in that time frame, I actually like it. I'll sit down with my next opponents. I go, hey man, let's just have a fun game, because neither one of us is going to win now. This game needs to be really fun. Play your fun list, or play something you wanted to try. Do something crazy in the game.
You know what's neat about that? You can say that as you go up and you're winning.
Well,
too.
you could
say, "Hey, man, let's have a fun game."
Yeah.
I mean, and that's like, I don't know, it's one of those things. Like, it feels so stupid to say, but you can have fun in the winners bracket
you can.
too.
You very much
It doesn't have to be like cutthroat. I mean, you still play within the rules. You don't. Like my biggest thing is I don't ask for takebacks during tournaments. You shouldn't be asking for takebacks. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be taking takebacks, and you shouldn't be expecting to give takebacks. Mm-hmm. Just because once we're playing at a higher level than the average, so you should be playing at a higher level.
Yep, you will still get asked for them.
Oh, absolutely, you still will, and honestly, I'll still usually give them. See, and it's one of those weird just sentiment like that, and I think that falls into more of the. I'm not here playing for 80 grand. I'm not playing for for my own life. I am playing for fun. And I think it also sometimes, if someone makes like just a bonehead mistake, like, oh, I forgot to put Fury on my War Beast, or oh, I really wanted to play this card. Do you mind if I go back and do that? I'd rather win beating my opponent when they're playing their best, rather than win on my opponent forgetting to do something.
Yeah. That said, if somebody forgets to move into the zone, I'll take the win.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, turn over.
Yeah, it's like
it's weird, but there are certain lines where you can't really go back.
Usually, to me, I look at on the subject of takebacks. If we're going to talk about them, I usually look at the game state and I go, are we at a point where we cannot roll back simply enough to the point where he made the mistake that anything would be different? Like, if you tell me I activate my Warcaster, going back to War Machine real quick, and I'm going to do this, this, and this, I end my Warcaster's activation, I activate this unit, they're going to run in and they're going to try and hit your guys. I roll the dice, I swing and I miss. Oh crap, I forgot to cast Carnage. I obviously had the focus of the Fury to do it. Do you mind if I cast it? No, sorry. You've gone so far past the point of activation now that the only reason you even thought about casting the spell is because all of a sudden you realized you were never going to hit my guys in the first place.
You've gone too far down in the changes, decision tree or whatever.
One of the things we always tell, that being said, one of the things we always tell people in our Crucible, this is how we do it document, which is something we pass out to everybody. We always say, takebacks should not be expected, but you're also not expected to give them.
Yep.
If you do give them, it's on you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you do it, don't cry about it afterwards when the guy beats you because you gave him a takeback.
Or if your opponent doesn't give them to you.
Yes.
And that's where I find the real risk.
And that's so like, I don't know if I would call it poor sportsmanship, but that's kind of poor sportsmanship.
It definitely, it's a borderline area, but it's a competitive environment, so it's like, don't cry about it afterwards if you do it and if they don't give it back.
If you give them an advantage and they don't give it back to you, then that's the choice you made.
It's a player choice, and does it reflect badly on them? Not necessarily. They just may be used to playing in a different way, and they don't give quarter or expect it.
Yeah. And apparently they expect it, but
well, yeah, maybe. So if and they may play that way in their meta.
Yeah.
So a great example of this. This is a very probably unique to War Machine thing. So, but you'll understand it hopefully after I describe it. In the Steamroller rules, and the Steamroller rules for War Machine are a standard packet that comes out from Privateer Press every year telling them this is how we're going to run our standard tournament format. In there, it says everybody gets an extension once during the game. It says you must declare you're going to take the extension before your timer runs out. Most people in casual games, even if they're playing on a timer, the timer goes off, they say, I'll take my extension. Well, it doesn't behoove the other player in a tournament to actually give you that extension. You've actually just violated the rules. And if you go back to the rules and read them word for word, and by the way, Privateer Press is really good about writing rules very specifically,
word for word,
so you don't have any ambiguity. It's not. I could see in 40K or Fantasy or a lot of other miniature games where there's a lot more ambiguity that maybe you don't hold it to it. But at that point, it feels really crappy if you're the guy who doesn't get his extension off. But the other guy's within his rights, and you can't tell him how to play the game. He's playing by the rules. Yeah. So now, do I agree with it? Nah, not really. I think it doesn't take much for somebody to go, oh, sure, go ahead. Of course, take it. It takes 2 seconds, and they do it. If it's something that really impinges on the flow of the game, that's a different story. But that's my personal beef with that.
And,
but you can't blame somebody for playing by the rules.
Yes. Yep. And strangely enough, I don't think, at least in the War Machine community here anyways, I've ever ran into a player that when your timer went off and you didn't declare your extension saying, I'm going to take it, that has said no.
Actually, I've seen it happen.
Really?
Yeah.
At Crucible last year, so to be fair, I wasn't aware of that rule until maybe about 5 months ago, and I've been playing for a little over a year now. Like, I honestly, I noticed people doing it, but it's usually because they looked at their clock, they realized they had 45 seconds left, and they're in the middle of activation. I'm just going to take it. But when I first started playing, I just thought, you got 1 5-minute extension, your timer goes off, I'll take it, and you just keep going. And then I realized that didn't exist, but the entire time I've played this game, I've never actually had somebody say no.
Oh, so it doesn't happen to you? I'm sorry, keep on cutting you off.
I've actually seen the opposite where time hits. I think I've probably even done this in tournaments before. Time hits, it's a beep, 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 and you look at your opponent and goes, you're taking your extension? And they'll say yes. It's one of those things like, well, if they're mid-activation, because they're trying, on time turns, as you see your clock get to 2 minutes and under on a 10-minute turn, you're busting ass.
Yeah,
you're chucking your dice as fast as you can. You're moving things. It gets a little sloppy, but you try to keep it clean.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, before you know it, those 2 minutes are gone and your thing is beeping. And usually your opponent knows full well that if you're halfway through a unit and you still have more stuff to do, you're intending to take your extension that turn. Mm-hmm. And like I certainly know I've done it. Say, so you're taking your extension, right? And they go, yeah. And at that point, usually, like if they're mid dice roll, I've grabbed their timer and I'm adding time for them.
Yeah,
because it's
good players.
It's the way I play. But
Tree is a very generous player. By the way, he always is. He's one of the greatest guys.
He will punch your face in, but he will do it very fairly.
Yes, he will.
I'll give you every opportunity to get punched in the face.
But here's the thing: you can walk away from that kind of situation a little butthurt over it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And most people will. The minute that snafu happens, and you realize that you're in the wrong, but it shouldn't be that way. You know, don't dwell on it. What you should be saying is, that's never going to happen to me again.
Yes.
I'm never going to get caught out in a tournament that way. I will absolutely get it because I can't depend on anybody else to be the sportsman that I wish they were. And again, like I say, I'm not even knocking the person for the sportsmanship on the other side. He's playing by the rules. If it's in the rules, it's in the rules.
It's no different than anything else, than any other rule in the game or in the packet. It's just
playing Warhammer for as many years as I did. I got used to that. It really came down to it.
Cutthroat mentality.
You got to read the rules as written because you're never really sure how anybody's going to interpret it. So it's like, well, okay, so default as rules as written. I can't cry about it. I decided to play the game. So accept the rules as written and just play with them. And if that means that there are certain loopholes to exploit, I don't really have a problem with anybody exploiting them. When I was younger, I did. Right? I felt it was the injustice of it all. You know. But as I've grown older, and like I said, I don't have as much ego invested in it anymore. I just like, well, whatever the rules are, that's what we decided to play.
So, Crucible, I am excited. I am very excited.
That's great to hear.
I cannot wait.
So, Craig,
I will probably play in 0 qualifiers, but I'm excited to go to the main event.
Tell us about Crucible this year, or this coming year. What can we expect out of Crucible 2015? This is what, Crucible 4, right?
This will be Crucible 4.
So what can we expect this coming year? You know,
it's bigger and better than ever.
Will we see a new Crucible sticker on the Craigmobile?
Yes.
All right.
So, tell us about last year's Crucible, so we have a comparison for the rest of the viewers. If you know some of the numbers and stuff like attendance-wise and things like that?
What events we're on?
Well, let me tell you about it. So Crucible is an event we hold in Orlando every year since 2012. At the time, it was called Crucible 2012, and we switched to numbers because everybody else went to dates. And that's my resistance to authority thing surfacing. I'm like, I'm not going to be like everybody else. So we're coming into our 4th year. Last year, we keep on adding systems every year. Like I said, it started out as War Machine only, but we've added everything. So we had War Machine and Horde still was probably the biggest population-wise and had the most events going on, but that's just because it's gentrified.
Total of six tournaments, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. But over 3 days. We added 40K last year. 40K was in its second year, and then we added Warhammer Fantasy last year as well. We had about 200 players all told for all systems.
So you had bolt action as well, didn't you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Wow, I forgot about bolt action.
It's tough to remember because they were actually in a completely different room.
Yep.
But I went over and saw some of them a couple of times. I had some friends who were playing in there. So.
Yeah. Bolt action too. I'm so sorry, Patrick Ballinger is the organizer there. I totally did him a disservice. They actually joined later in the year, so we didn't have as big of a push there, but Patrick filled out every single position that he said he'd be able to fill out. And they were a smaller contingent, but they had a great time. Patrick puts on a great event. So within our, we've always kind of kept the events separate. If you're playing in War Machine, you're playing in War Machine. If you're playing in 40K, it's kind of styled around the old style Games Workshop grand tournaments. In that there's a main event for War Machine and Hordes. We have our qualifiers. That's really kind of our main event. Those happen on Saturday. They're qualifying heats that everybody plays in to see if they can get into Masters the next day on Sunday. Those who get into Masters is a top 16. They get to play in Masters, and then everybody else plays in kind of consolation tournaments and other more fun tournaments, which we also give out prizes for.
Tons of prizes.
Or walk around drinking beer.
Yes.
Yeah, or that too. For 40K, the GT happens on Saturday and Sunday, so you play all 5 games of that on Saturday and Sunday.
They did a team tournament on Friday, didn't they?
They did a team tournament on
That's
Friday.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, Friday's always been kind of a warm-up day.
Yeah.
It's always a fun day.
The warm-up and the fun games. We did Who's the Boss? I won Who's the Boss. It was pretty awesome.
I came in third, so I think.
No, it was a great tournament, and then you had Hardcore, which was also a qualifier into the Crucible Masters.
Yeah, so back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So like I said, the main events generally happen on Saturday, Sunday. Friday is more of a fun day in which 40K does a team tournament. Fantasy this year is going to have a speed hammer tournament. Where they actually have time turns for fantasy.
That seems crazy.
Move your block faster than usual.
Well, it is crazy, but it's like this gives you an excuse to start off the whole con, bring your favorite beverage, and have a good time, meet a bunch of people, get in the mindset, and then next day you're ready to go. And
next day you got the game face on.
Yep. For War Machine, yes, we this year we're doing something different, but last year we had a Hardcore and Who's the Boss running on Friday.
Hardcore was like 6 rounds and went till like crazy late, didn't it?
It did, yeah. So we always said that Hardcore we'd limit to 32 people so we could get it done. Time is always a factor in cons. If you ever want to start your own convention, don't underestimate the amount of time it takes to run a tournament. But then so many people wanted to get in that we just decided to expand it, and everybody was okay with it. The beautiful part about War Machine in general is that people can drop if it's getting too late. If they've lost and they don't want to play anymore, they can drop, and it doesn't really hurt too much. So the people who wanted to play to the end and get a qualifying spot, it was possible to pre-qualify for Masters by winning Hardcore. So the people who were in those final brackets, they definitely played to the end. And then they had a much easier time on Saturday because they were already qualified.
So this year.
All right. So a lot of changes. Let's just go through the systems. I already talked about, first of all, we're adding new systems, and also we're adding card games. And that's a big thing for us, and something that Jesus, the owner of Dogs, is actually spearheading.
Says thumbs up, double thumbs up.
Yep. He's got a lot of plans, a ton of tournaments. We're looking forward to adding that in. But just getting back to our returning systems, Bolt Action is expanding the number of spots that we have for them.
Awesome.
And they are going to be running tank battles this year. They're going to be running a standard tournament. And then they're also going to be running a team tournament. Team tournaments seem to be the vibe for this year.
Interesting. So how many slots is Bolt Action going to have?
They have 16 slots, which is small overall compared to the rest of the group, but they're a growing system, and we've decided we're going to commit to trying to be a hub for Bolt Action in the Southeast, and maybe even in the U.S., because it doesn't get enough attention, widespread, at least from a competitive scene, and so we want to be a part of growing that.
Fantastic. Cool.
For Fantasy, like I said, they have a Speed Hammer tournament on Friday. that starts, I think, at 1 or 2 o'clock. I can't remember on the exact dates. They're all out on our website, crucibleorlando.com. And then on the Saturday and Sunday, they're going to run a standard GT, which everybody's involved in. For 40K, we have a team tournament on Friday. Same as that's become a traditional thing. It's well attended, but we're also doing a narrative event this year. So it's possible to skip the team tournament, start playing in the narrative event on Friday, play it through the entire weekend, and Tim Wright, our lead for them, has a ton of stuff planned around the narrative event, with the idea that even if you're playing in the GT, it will be possible for you to drop and play in the narrative event at any time.
Cool.
You can always join in.
Very cool.
So they'll have, I believe he's got Apocalypse games planned. He's got smaller games planned. So like they'll be fighting on the moon and fighting on the space station and then fighting on the main planet. And it's all around a whole big campaign that basically runs the whole weekend.
Oh, that's cool.
Very cool.
What's the cap for 40K?
We have 80 total positions to play 40K. Whenever I talk about game systems, by the way, I'm talking about these are actual table spots that we have.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing planning one of these big events is how many spots do we have for people to stand and play games at, essentially. So we have 80 spots total. They'll be split between the GT and the narrative event. You can play in either one. The GT is still kind of the main event on Saturday and Sunday, but like I said, it's possible to be playing in it. If you've lost your first 3 games and you want to drop out and play in the narrative event, you don't have to go home. You've now got something to do. And you can drop out of the narrative event and do whatever you want to. So that'll be running all weekend long, and then the GT runs on Saturday and Sunday.
Okay.
And then for War Machine, a ton of changes there as well. We've dropped our Friday hardcore, and we've adopted the Iron Gauntlet format instead.
Officially sanctioned, correct? It isn't official?
It's not officially sanctioned until we have an official judge.
Oh, okay.
Privateer Press has a judge program. There's a test that has to be taken, and you basically have to be approved to even take the test. So it's a very tight community. And something that they want to kind of keep the reins on, as opposed to like the press ganger community for Privateer Press, where just about anybody can get in so long as they show a motivation to be in, and like I said, have a sponsor. With the judges, you actually have to be approved, and then you have to pass a very complicated test. Anybody who's played War Machine or Hordes knows that the rules go pretty deep.
Yep.
And there are a lot of interactions. Knowing how all the details of that work, the judges have to know it by heart.
So is anybody locally applying for judgeship? Or are you guys trying to find one to bring in?
Chris Cuevas is applying for it. He's the guy I started the event with and is my co-organizer. And so we'll see how all that works out. If for some reason that Chris can't ultimately pass the test, we're looking to get another judge from nationally to come in.
Fantastic.
And then it'll be, regardless, we're still probably going to run with the format. If everything kind of falls apart there, we may switch back to hardcore, but right now Iron Gauntlet is on. And it's gotten a good reception. Everybody's kind of planning their 3 lists.
Awesome.
And all that sort of thing. So Iron Gauntlet is limited to 32 spots. We can't make it any bigger than that because there is a set amount of rounds that has to happen. We're starting at 1 o'clock and we're going until midnight or later to complete it. So that's how it'll go. We also are running, in order so that everybody else gets to play, because that's only 32 slots, and we do have 96 positions for War Machine this year. Everybody else gets to play in our first ever team tournament, which is a 3-member team. Yeah, it's going to be a great time. It's been something that people have asked for years, ever since we started it. You should do a team tournament, and I have high hopes for it. The great thing about a team tournament is that the number of rounds is determined by the number of teams rather than the number of players. So it's possible to fit a 64-player tournament into 5 rounds or 4 rounds.
So is the team tournament going to follow like the WTC kind of style team tournament, or is it just going to be you're all on a team but you still play your own separate matchups and there's no, I'm going to put this guy up for you guys to put somebody against him? And
Yep, you'll have a captain that picks the match, that decides the matchups. The other opposing captain gets to choose the second matchup and so forth. It's instead of like with the World Team Championships where you have 5 team or 5 players.
Well, I have 3.
You'll only have 3, so it limits the matchups a little bit more. But it's like I said, it's supposed to be for fun.
Yeah.
We absolutely give away prizes for every tournament you play in.
Yep.
In every event, there are plaques
tons of
and
swag.
giveaways. Yeah. So one of the things when we started the event, we wanted to make sure that people were able to walk away with stuff they could put on their wall or point to and say that was from that year. That was always a big thing for me. Even if it was painting prizes or whatever, I always wanted stuff. So
that's
we
Friday.
always try to. So that's so Iron Gauntlet and team tournament on Friday. Then Saturday is devoted completely to the qualifying heats. This year we have 3 qualifying heats.
And it's top how many from each make it in? Is it top 4? Or?
It's top 3. It's top 4. That it's up to 12.
Yep.
And then the other 4 slots are determined by our Carnage qualifier tournaments that we run in local game stores in the southeast here, and for a total of 16. So 4 players from every heat. We do the heats. We separate out people by location, so that chances are they won't end up playing people they already know.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing worse than going to a tournament and you end up playing someone you rode with the first round.
Yeah. Yes, that's the absolute
it's brutal. You're like, we drove 15 hours to play the same game we played last Thursday.
Yes.
Yeah. So we do our best to try and make sure those matchups don't happen. If people have organizations that they belong to, we'll do the same thing. So if you have a club or something like that that maybe is spread out over different locations, we'll still try and get you into different groups.
Team Dogs of War.
Yeah, there you go.
Who won last year? I'm going to club with that guy. And all the people from Masters, I'm going to club with them.
Yeah.
Try to keep us as separate as we can.
So Masters. Masters is a War Machine Weekend qualifier, right?
It is. So the winner of Masters gets a War Machine Weekend slot. A War Machine Weekend is a big thing that happens out in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And it's probably the biggest War Machine event in the world outside of Lock and Load, which is Privateer Press's signature event.
Yep.
It's certainly the biggest, probably competitive event in the world. If you win a War Machine qualifier, you're automatically into their Invitational, which is the kind of their premier event. So that's a big thing. Winning Masters at Crucible also gets you quite a bit of prestige in the Southeast.
Yep.
The people who have won it in the past are people like Brian White, Kurt Heineman, John Galvin won it the first year. He's actually the guy who does a ton of artwork for us as well. John Galvin's a great guy. Kurt and Brian were both on the World Team Championship teams for the U.S. this year. Yep. So the competition is fierce. You will run into the best players in the meta, in the Southeast regional meta, but also from the rest of the U.S.
Yeah, we have people fly in. I was actually surprised as a new player to War Machine going to Crucible, being that, a lot of people don't seem to want to come to Florida for tournaments, no matter what the size is. It's such a trek, right? To see these names that I'm new to the game, but I already recognize because I've seen them, winning other big tournaments and stuff like that. All of a sudden they show up and you're like, oh wow, that's Brian White or that's Kurt Heineman. That's really cool, So it's not just the best players in the Southeast. We really get a large fraction of the rest of the community too as a whole that comes down.
Absolutely. People will travel for it. What was I going to say? It's fierce there, competition there. You get to see the list they plop down too, which is sometimes a surprise. And you're like, oh, what is he doing with that? Oh my gosh, I'd never even realized. Brian White specifically got me to play Prime Asphyxius. Just from watching him play with it. So great learnings there.
Well, and the cool part is it's right after TempleCon too. So all these players go to TempleCon and they say, okay, what worked, what didn't, and now I've got a week and a half. Do I change it before I go to Crucible or not?
Yep.
So you may end up seeing a lot of stuff that did well at TempleCon played down here too, just because of the short time frame.
Absolutely. You also. Oh, I'm sorry.
Say on the non-gaming side, also this is going to be end of February, start of March. It's not a bad time to come to Florida.
It's the perfect time to come to Florida.
It's an amazing time to come to Florida.
Yeah.
It's starting to it'll be starting to warm up down here, which means it'll be going from the 70s to the 80s.
Yep.
As opposed to snow.
Oh, it's a beautiful time of year, and we are on.
Let's get into that. Let's finish that up. Yeah. What about Sunday? So we have Masters.
Yeah. Then we also have 3 other more casual tournaments planned. We have our traditional Gibbet, which is a 35-point steamroller, standard steamroller, which of course we can then give prizes for as well. But we're also we're trying to decide, and it really comes down to volunteers of who wants to run it. We want to run Who's the Boss, and we want to run spell draft tournaments as well on top of it.
So fun.
So those are crazy formats for War Machine. They're a lot of fun, and they're a great way to spend. Saturday is a grueling day. I'm not going to. It's a 5-round tournament, no matter what you're in, and you are playing hard. Having Sunday to be able to kind of kick back and play.
That's why 2 years in a row I've not played on Sunday. Spell draft or Who's the Boss may change that.
Yeah. There you go.
So before we move into the rest of Crucible, so we have one for sure qualifier, which is War Machine Weekend. We're looking at hopefully getting Iron Gauntlet qualified.
Yes.
Do the other games, the other tabletop games, do they have larger tournaments that Crucible feeds into, or I don't know what the major competitive scene is for the rest of those kind of styles.
There's a circuit for 40K. Is it the Ring of Fire or something like that?
I don't know.
No idea.
I think I'm getting that wrong. I'm so sorry for you 40K players out there. Tim, our 40K lead, is in talks with getting involved in that. There aren't any other qualifiers that come out of that, but honestly, the fantasy national meta is still trying to, I think, find its equilibrium about doing that sort of thing. So I see big things happening in the future because 9th edition is coming out pretty soon too. So we'll see. But we're always trying to look for ways to get, 9th edition.
Wow.
We're always looking for ways to involve Crucible in the broader meta. So
Definitely.
if there are chances to get involved in circuits and that sort of thing, we absolutely want to be a part of it. I could say, honestly, getting involved as a War Machine Weekend qualifier, which we have been every year since our first year, it was a huge,
deal.
Yeah. It brought people in that normally wouldn't have come down.
Yeah, exactly.
And just from an organizer standpoint, obviously that's great. But just from growing the event, events like this, I firmly believe are rallying points for the gaming community. And without them, everybody kind of splits off into their own little metas, does their thing, still has a fun time, but the overall strength of the area doesn't grow as fast as it is when you've got a rallying point. So with that said, we're also running X-Wing this year.
The new tabletop game, X-Wing, will be the
X-Wing,
new one ratting.
the fastest growing tabletop game in the land.
Yeah.
We've got a tournament that we're running on Saturday for that. And we're also looking to try and run one on Sunday as well.
How many slots do we set up for those? Do you know?
We have 32 slots for them on both days.
Okay.
And they will, I think we can fill them out. The great thing about the X-Wing thing is anybody can play in them. You can come specifically to play X-Wing, but if you're playing War Machine or 40K or anything like that and you want to get on an X-Wing, we're running the X-Wing in the evening on Saturday, and then we're running in the afternoon on Sunday.
Fantastic. And then the big news, we're adding card games this year.
Yeah, a lot of card games. Jesus, we should...
He's over here working on card games off camera right now, actually.
Fantasy flight games, it kind of seems to be the theme. So we'll be running Game of Thrones tournaments. We'll be running Netrunner tournaments. We'll be running Conquest tournaments. What am I forgetting?
Star Wars.
And Star Wars LCG is also... And those are running all weekend long. The price point on that to get into it is very low. It's only $10 to get in to be able to play card games, and then there's a price for every card game that you want to get into. But Jesus has a ton of stuff planned for prizes, and you get to get in to the regular con too, or our vendor section, which is another thing I got to talk about. You'll be able to buy anything you want there and shop around, see what's going on with the rest of the con, and just basically enjoy the con atmosphere, which is a blast.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, the energy in that place is enormous.
Yeah, we have a great hotel this year. It's the International Palms on International Drive in Orlando. For those of you who are not from Orlando, or maybe don't get down to Orlando as much from other places in Florida, International Drive is the center of the bustling tourist area in Orlando. You have Walt Disney World and you have Universal Studios. They're both within easy driving distance of International Drive, and there's a ton of restaurants and bars. It's like
mini golf. I mean, you've got
helicopter rides,
indoor skydiving,
all of the crazy touristy stuff you can think of. It's all right there.
If you are a man who has a wife who does not want to let you go, or you're a woman who wants to come but her husband's not letting her for some reason, give them passes to Disney or Universal.
For some reason.
Fly them down, take a mini vacation. As Mike was saying, the weather gets beautiful that time of the year. It's not too hot yet. It's not very cold.
If you're not from Florida, like 75, 80
it's
degrees
amazing time to go to the parks.
Totally pool weather.
Yeah, it's usually fairly dry that time of year too, so we generally don't get rained out. And you can... it's just before spring break.
Yep.
It's actually kind of tailing into spring break, but so the tourist attractions are not exactly bustling with people either.
Packed,
so if there's a time to go to the parks as well, that's the time of year. February is the time of year.
And I mean, Crucible has secured us an amazing rate at the hotel. It's very affordable if you're going to want to stay on iDrive.
For that hotel especially.
Rate. So if you're getting the aggro from the...
It's $80, by the way.
If you're getting the aggro from the family, bring them on an Orlando vacation. I mean, this is a perfect excuse. Send them off to the parks. Come play some War Machine. Come play some Star Wars. Some AGOT. Some Netrunner. And, you'll have a good time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we said this at the beginning of the cast, but getting together with your fellow nerds to immerse yourself in your hobby for a weekend, there's nothing that really compares to that.
Oh, yeah.
Just to spend all that time with everybody else, you get to basically nonstop talk about that kind of stuff
Yep.
that all the rest of your friends roll their eyes at. If some of your friends don't play, and they're not really that interested in listening to it. Everybody there is doing the same thing. So it's
Best part was from this past Crucible was all the people who were staying at the hotel that weren't gamers that were like, "What are these guys doing?" Like, it wasn't the weird looks
why
either.
is there a giant man in a blue suit?
Oh, yeah.
It was actually
For the
cool. Like,
Space Marine.
I consistently saw people walking into the hall where we were playing, and they were walking up and saying, "What are you guys doing? Like, this is cool. What is this?" You know, and that's really cool to see the non-gaming people that are around there actually think that what we're doing is that interesting. You know,
Yeah.
I thought that was actually kind of nice.
We always talk to the bar as well to make sure that they have sending cocktail waitresses to the tables and stuff like that. We try and make it as absolutely gamer friendly as possible, it's a great time.
So,
Biggest thing for me, every year I've gone to this, you think you go in, you're like, all right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do all of this stuff, and I'm going to be burned out on War Machine, or be burned out on 40K, whatever. Every year I go, this is the event that recharges my batteries for months.
Yep.
Isn't that weird?
I come back, we were driving home, the drive home last year was nonstop talk about War Machine and what we were going to do, what lists we wanted to try out, what armies we're looking at, everything was War Machine, and, starts you painting again, it gets you, itching to play in the league again, it's just, it's a total, it's like a deep dive into a pool that is the most refreshing thing as it comes to the hobby.
Well, there you go. That's a high praise. I should also say that we take a lot of pride in the games that we do. So we always try to make sure that the boards are the best boards we can do.
Fantastic.
We supply a ton of the terrain. It's not flat plywood that's been painted green and felt circles and all that sort of thing. It's the scenery on the boards is amazing. Warhammer Fantasy showed up last year with some of the most beautiful boards I've ever seen.
They put us to shame. We War Machine War Machine players. You see a bunch of people show up silver, the silver unpainted army or the partially painted army. No, the fantasy players show up with their own damn boards.
There was what was it, the He-Man army or whatever, Skull Mountain or whatever.
It
was awesome.
Snake Mountain.
Snake Mountain, it was great.
Snake Mountain Dark Elder.
I forgot about that.
I went and looked at it a dozen times, and it made me. I cracked up every time.
He had printed out laminated sheets too that listed out what every unit was. This converted unit is this, and a little description on it, and would hand it to every one of his players like a menu, like here you go.
Yeah, this is what all my stuff is.
For people who want to come to Crucible, how can they register? What's the cost to register?
Yeah.
How do they tell you I'm coming? And here's what I want to do.
So crucibleorlando.com is the website. It's got everything there that you need to register. Generally speaking, the tickets to the larger systems are $65. That's for the whole weekend. T-shirt add-on is like $20. We have a gold membership as well. That's another $20 add-on that we always talk about as our supporter badge. And Mr. Tree Monkey over here is one of our first ones.
Hey, I was too.
I was too.
Yep. So,
Dogs of War podcast loves the Crucible.
We do.
yeah.
We're actually one of the vendors
we
there
appreciate
too.
that. Yeah, absolutely. So but that gets you in for the entire weekend. It gets into everything for whatever the system is that you're doing, and a couple add-ons. Like I said, you can get into X-Wing by just paying that overall price. Bolt action, I think, is $45. It's smaller, so we try and respect the fact that you're not getting as big of an experience.
Yep.
The gamers always come first for us. So we want to make sure that everybody walks away thinking they got an absolute deal for what they did. We played on beautiful boards. We had every opportunity to play every game we wanted to play.
And $65 is a bargain for that kind of weekend.
And I mean, and you guys get a ton of prize support too. I was impressed with the amount of prize support.
The trophies last year were so slick.
Yeah. So we're talking to some of our manufacturers about expanding that too. So manufacturers, let me talk about vendors. We have a big vendor area this year, which is a first for us. We always kind of envision this as mainly a tournament, but we always have demand for, can you bring in more people? Well, we want to buy stuff.
Yep.
So this year we have an actual vendor area that's included in the gaming hall, but it's at the end of the gaming hall, and we're going to have, I think it's 16 different vendors in there this year.
Oh, wow.
Several of them are manufacturers doing laser cut things or doing their own model building and that sort of thing.
Sweet.
Very cool.
So we have lots of options there. We're talking to all of them about options for maybe creating customized trophies and things like that as well, which everybody loves. And Warsenal is our prime example. Last year they did all the faction trophies for War Machine. They were beautiful. I think everybody walked in. I think that's actually what drove people to enroll for hardcore last year, realizing that they could get faction wins for it.
And I want to say that to win your faction trophy, you had to have probably played in hardcore.
Well,
because it gave you that like the 6 extra games.
Yep. I think that's also really important to note on too is the best in faction prizes, because the cool thing about that is you can win no events the entire weekend and you can still walk out with the best in faction trophy. And I think that's an amazing opportunity for players that just want to play a ton of games. Maybe they're not the greatest players in the world, but they can play a ton of games, and if they win more than they lose, they have a really good chance for qualifying for best in faction.
And some of those trophies were hotly contested last year. Like I know the Crix one especially was one of those. I was playing Crix, I had no shot at it, but no, just because I didn't play the hardcore, and John Carter and Brian White were 2 of the numerous people fighting for that trophy.
The Menoff one was the same way.
The great one about that particular trophy too is it literally came down to the last game in the qualifying heat to see if it could pick it in.
Great. Yeah. So, final thoughts?
Join us, absolutely. It's good. Join us. It's bliss.
One of us.
It's great. We always talk about it bringing together the Florida meta, and it has become that. But like I said, nationally, people are coming
into this point. It's not even just Florida.
Yeah.
We got a great number from the other southeastern states.
Well, one of the qualifiers is in Georgia, for God's sake. So,
let's talk about the qualifiers.
Well, we already had one. I went to Tampa.
Yep. So we have a series of qualifier tournaments. Well, I shouldn't call them qualifier tournaments because they're not. We have a series of tournaments that we hold in local gaming stores called the Carnage tournaments. Right, Crucible Carnage. So. For 40K, for Fantasy, for Bolt Action, and for War Machine, you can go to a local store that is running one of these, and they're all over the state. They're in Tampa. We actually have them up in Georgia, in Atlanta at Gigabytes. We're going to have one here at Dogs of War. We got them down in Miami. We got them up in Jacksonville. You can go to these tournaments, and they're sponsored by the local stores. They're put on by the local stores. You can win a ticket to Crucible at them. So if you take first place, you'll get your admission to Crucible paid by the store.
And you get a slot into Masters, correct?
That is for War Machine only. Yep. So for 40K, there is no Masters.
Right, well, War Machine's the one that has Masters. So.
Yep. So for War Machine specifically, winning the Carnage tournament gets you automatically qualified for Masters.
So it makes your weekend kind of easy, actually.
Yeah, now you can still play in the qualifier heats. Absolutely, but your ticket's already punched to the end. Sometimes we get some debate about should those people actually be in the tournaments. The truth is, if you can't beat those people, you don't belong in Masters.
Yep.
That's my feeling.
You're not going to win in Masters anyway.
You won't beat the Masters at that point anyway.
So. Right. So might as well go through the gauntlet and see where you stand.
That's a ton of fun.
Oh yeah, and plus everybody wants to play games. It's most people who come down, they want to get as many games in as possible.
Last thing you want to do is show up for a 3-day convention where you're not allowed to play till Sunday. That's that would be pretty rough.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a great policy to lose players.
Awesome, man. So come check it out. It's a ton of fun. As a guy who's went to the one most recently and the newest player in the group, I loved it. Jesus is going to do a fantastic job with the FFG games. So.
Angelo showed up last year. What did you have? Maybe 2 months of playing the game?
About 2.5, yeah.
Yeah, Crucible,
yeah, and played in the Crucible all weekend long, and I think took your lumps along the way, but learned a ton.
Honestly, I think when I mathed out my games at the very end, including the one buy that I got during the Gibbet, I walked out with like a 50% win rate, which I'm happy about. So you can't ask for more than that.
So if you're a newer player in any game system, there's absolutely things for you to do, and you should totally come. It is a blast, and if just for the ability to immerse yourself in it.
Are you guys going to leave the game hall open after the tournaments end every night like you did last time?
Yeah, we'll keep it open and basically until people are ready to leave. Around 2 a.m., most people are.
So you could almost kind of do some like Iron Arena kind of pickup games and stuff like that if you wanted to after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. When the tournaments are over, the game tables are open and you can play on them.
And that's an important thing, actually, is one thing. I'm going to bring in some of the social games as well, like Are You a Werewolf and stuff like that for after hours. I'm sure we'll find a copy of Cards Against Humanity to play.
Yep.
Well, and with Jesus running the card games too, there's even more stuff to do. I mean, it is possible for you to play in other miniatures tournaments and decide on Sunday you want to play in card tournaments too. So I know there's a lot of people who play all kinds of game systems. There will be a heavy presence there for Netrunner and Game of Thrones, I know especially. So great chance for.
Well, outstanding, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Final thoughts?
Thanks for joining us, Craig.
It was great to be here. That's my final thought.
Hopefully we'll have you on some more episodes in the future.
Yeah, I would love to come back.
If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, contact us through the usual means. We'll have them in the description of the video. The video description will also include all the dates and all the information for Crucible, the qualifiers coming up, and then check your favorite card game websites here in the next couple of days. We'll be posting all the announcements for the Crucible tournaments on the card game sites as well.
CrucibleOrlando.com, right?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Stole it.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Okay.